Well, great. Let's get started. Folks, thanks for joining us today for I can't believe I'm saying our second annual elections preview event. I want to thank all our sponsors today, including the American Property Owners Alliance, and we'll hear from them a little bit on, but we've got a great lineup and I wanted to jump right in. We're going to start with New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy, who, aside from serving his second term as governor, is also the chairman of the Democratic Governors Association. So no one has seen more polling on the races at play today than he has. So Governor Murphy, welcome.
Hey, Reed, good to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. Let's start with the gubernatorial contests up this year and the one that you're playing defense on. Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear running for a second term in one of the reddest states in America against Attorney General Daniel Cameron. What's the state of the race in Kentucky today?
Well, listen, I'm cautiously optimistic, but I emphasize cautiously. Andy's done an incredible job as governor of the Commonwealth. He's lived at the kitchen table. He's led in times of real crisis, in his case, overwhelming Mother Nature related tornadoes and floods. He's brought thousands of jobs to Kentucky. You look at what Ford Motor has done alone, and he's just been focused on the stuff that matters to his residents of the Commonwealth. The DGA, of which I'm chair, we have put in a significant double-digit millions investment. He's earned his reelection, but as you rightfully point out, Kentucky is not necessarily, I think, to be charitable, not necessarily a home game for Democratic candidates. But I am, as I say, cautiously optimistic. He's done everything he needs to do to get reelected. It's our job, number one. It's the most important race we've got, and we shall see. It's game time soon.
Yeah. Governor Beshear has focused a lot on abortion rights in this race, which I feel is a little surprising given Kentucky's rightward lean. What does that tell you about the salience of abortion rights ahead of next year's presidential contest?
It's significant. We're seeing it in New Jersey. The Republic, we've got legislative races. We don't have a governor's race, but the Senate Republican leader previewed that if they had their druthers and got into the majority, they would revisit funding for Planned Parenthood and abortion restrictions. And New Jersey may be bluer than Kentucky, but it immediately struck a raw nerve. You're seeing it all over the country. You've seen it actually in Kentucky in referenda. You've seen it in red Kansas. So I think, Reed, this continues to resonate. People are rightfully, it's the only right that's ever been taken from Americans by the U.S. Supreme Court, and people are rightfully really angry about it, especially women, but not only women. And I think this has legs because it's so salient and it's so important well into next year.
Yeah. Andy Beshear is not Kentucky's first Republican governor. In fact, it is more rare for Kentucky to elect a Republican than a Democrat in recent years, to that office at least. Does it tell you anything that Kentucky still elects Democratic governors? I mean, do voters think differently about their governors than they do about federal candidates?
Yeah, I think most importantly, it says a lot about Andy. Andy's he may not be a unicorn, but he is a pretty unique guy who has just done an extraordinary job. Obviously, was Attorney General. His dad was governor before him. He's just the sort of leader that a Commonwealth like Kentucky would want. But I think more broadly, Reed, and I just stepped down as the chair of the National Governors Association, and for all of our disagreements, that's a good example of an organization where a lot of governors from both parties get around tables and have substantive, fact-based discussions where you can cut through the noise. And I think it says a lot about the role that governors play, a little bit like the role that mayors play. We have to balance the budget. We're chief executives. At the end of the day, we govern for every one of our residents. And I think that says a lot about the position, but even more so in Andy's case about the man.
Yeah. Let's move on to Mississippi, where Governor Tate Reeves faces Public Service Commissioner Brandon Presley. You all at the DGA just put out a poll showing a tight race. What do you think's happening down there?
Well, listen, this is absolutely tight, and it's tough but winnable is my headline. And if you're in our shoes, it's a cocktail with three parts. One part is a very unpopular, for good reasons, I should say, very unpopular incumbent Republican governor. Everything from scandal to treatment of Black Mississippians to closure of rural hospitals. It's just the Jackson, Mississippi water crisis, which was an unforced error. It's just one thing after another. So that's a big piece of this. Secondly, you've got the largest by percent African-American population of any American state, and they are fired up, rightfully so, at that incumbent. And all the measures of their level of that community's level of enthusiasm suggest that there's going to be a significant turnout and support for our candidate. And then the third piece of that cocktail is our candidate. Brandon Presley is doing all the right things. He's a former mayor, as you suggest. He's a public utility commissioner. His life story is as real as it comes, including tragedy with his father. If all of that, he's working his tail off, he's raising money. The DGA is in a big way. And if all that weren't enough, he's Elvis Presley's cousin. So you add up all that together, this is as tight a race, as winnable a race for Democrats as we've had in Mississippi in a quarter century. And this is going to come right down to the wire.
Yeah, you guys have been hitting the Elvis puns pretty hard there. So the DGA has invested.
I promise I won't sing.
Thank you. Neither will I. The DGA has invested, I think it's 3.7 million in Mississippi so far. Can we expect more in the closing weeks?
Yeah, I think you can. I think that number only goes up. And we don't chase rainbows. One of the hallmarks of the DGA, other than we're raising a lot of money, unlike, frankly, any other cycle of this comparable cycle before, but they don't chase rainbows. They're very clear-eyed and sober about where they choose to place their bets. And as its chair, I could say we're proud of that. And this one is really tight, and we're going to do what we need to do.
Yeah, we've got some other elections up this year in legislative elections in your backyard in New Jersey, in Virginia. What are these races and the way they've been run going to tell us about the mood ahead of 2024? What lessons can President Biden and Democrats on down the ballot learn from what's happening this year?
Yeah, I can't speak with authority on places like Virginia, but I know it's a state I know well, but I can speak with some authority about what we're seeing in New Jersey. And both chambers, the entirety of the legislature is up for re-election. I would say what we're seeing and what we might be able to expect next year is one party that's basically trying to change the subject, and that's the Republicans, and getting very much into the woods of woke, anti-woke, asserting things that just aren't true, such as that the Democrats don't care about parental input in education, which is ludicrous. We are the education party. New Jersey is the #1 public education system in America, and you don't get that without parents always being at the table. So to my way of thinking, it's an us versus them, change the subject Republican Party. And by the way, very much now on the record, talking about limiting women's reproductive freedoms. That's not speculation from me. That's being spoken by their leadership. And on the other hand, I think, again, like as we discussed with Andy Beshear, I think Democrats have the better hand to play, including President Biden, maybe especially President Biden. And let's have this election out in our stadium, not an away stadium. And our stadium's the kitchen table. Let's look at jobs, affordability, education, opportunity, and in addition to playing a very complicated international/foreign policy hand about as well as it can be played. I just think we're the party that's at that kitchen table with the working families of America. And it's not speculation. The president has a lot of wins to prove that. The IRA, the bipartisan infrastructure law, the chips and technology law. Inflation is still with us, but it's coming down. Employment, job creation. The story is a good one. It's not all, we know there's still pain out there, but I'd rather be playing our hand, or in this case, his hand, than the other guy's hand.
Yeah. One thing we haven't heard a lot about in any of these races is this issue that seems like it should be politically salient, in that we just came through a global pandemic. I'm not hearing Andy Beshear talk about it. I'm barely hearing about Daniel Cameron talking about it. It's not a factor in Mississippi or in a lot of the Virginia races. How did we just go through this major disruption of a couple of years and we're not even talking about it in these races?
Pretty remarkable, isn't it?
Yeah.
I ran for re-election and won in the fall of 21, and it was very much a front burner issue in our re-election. Again, a lot of noise against fact, but we got through that. But Reed, I'll give you a statistic which doesn't get talked about, which I find incredible. It's consistent with your question. I believe New Jersey is the only state in America that's in the midst of a full-scale, third-party, independent post-mortem on the steps that we took during the pandemic. It's extraordinary. I had said from moment one that we were going to do that. It seems to be a natural act. No other state is doing that. We feel like we've turned the page. And please God, I hope that as a health matter, we have turned the page. But you're absolutely right. It is not a topic in our legislative elections here, and it does not feel like it's a topic in other races in the country.
Yeah. Let's zoom out a little bit. As after the day after we finish with these elections, we're going to be looking at elections ahead. As you think about the 11 governorships that are up next year, what states are Democrats going to go after, and what states are going to have to defend?
Well, the big one for us will likely be North Carolina, where Roy Cooper's been extraordinary, but he's term limited. So Josh Stein will in all likelihood, although there are more than one Democrat running, but the Attorney General, who's outstanding, will be our candidate. And I suspect it will be the Lieutenant Governor on the Republican side. And the choice is as stark as any I've ever been around. This is responsible adult leadership versus literally cloud cuckoo land. So that's going to be a big one. New Hampshire is going to be an open seat. Chris Sununu has made the decision, who's very popular. He's made the decision. He's not running. So we've got a couple of really outstanding Democratic candidates. I'm happy to say both women who are pursuing that. That's a shot. Jay Inslee is hanging his cleats up in Washington. So we got to find a way to get a Democrat elected there. That'll be a focus. And then there are other states you never know. I'm not sure, what Indiana will look like next year. Montana, which is up next year. So again, we don't chase rainbows at the DGA on the one hand, but we're also not blind if opportunity should emerge that we may not expect.
Yeah. All right. Governor Phil Murphy, thanks so much for taking the time. You've been very generous with us, and we appreciate it.
Thanks, Reed, for having me. Take care.
All right. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
All right. We reached out to the Republican Governors Association and several members of its executive committee, but no one could join us today, I'm sorry to say. So we're going to turn now to David Rexrode. He's the chairman of Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin's Spirit of Virginia PAC. David is a former executive director of the Republican Governors Association, where he managed a $400 million budget backing Republican candidates in all 50 states. And these days, he's spent all his time on the critical legislative elections in Virginia. I talked to Dave earlier today about what's at stake in those races. Dave, thanks for joining us today. Let's start with the overall state of the race for control of Virginia's General Assembly. Democrats control the Senate by a narrow margin. Republicans hold the House by a narrow margin. Give us sort of the context of this election. What are the issues that are top of voters' minds?
Sure. I think if you look at where these districts are, particularly the swing voters, they are in suburban communities in Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads and Metro Richmond. And so while there are unique issues in each region of the state and obviously within each race, the overarching issue that we're hearing the most about is cost of living and affordability. Second to that is education, particularly educational standards and learning loss from COVID. And then third, we're certainly hearing some about crime as we continue to kind of see some of the spikes over the past couple of years. And so those are the three real issues that our candidates are hearing when they're going door to door, that they're really talking about on the campaign trail, that they get asked most about. And those are also the issues that they're obviously, communicating to voters as well.
Yeah, you mentioned some of those regions that we should be focusing on. Can you give us some specific races to be watching? What are the races that are going to decide which side controls the Senate and the House?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at Northern Virginia, there are 3 Senate races that are all margin of error races, all suburban communities, and that's Tara Duran in the 27th, Bill Wolf in the 30th, and Juan Pablo Seguera in the 31st. These are all very close races. Most of them also, what's also interesting is those 3 races are in Virginia 7 and Virginia 10, which will be obviously very competitive races next year. We anticipate both those being open seats at the congressional level next year. And so that's kind of gives you a flavor of how competitive those races are. So I think those are 3 to pay attention to on the Senate side. And then on the House side, if you look at some of the races in the Metro Richmond area with David Owen and Kim Taylor, I think those are 2 that will be a good indicator for kind of how the races are going on election day.
Yeah. You mentioned some of the issues that voters are thinking about. Are we going to be able to learn anything from 2023 that the 2 parties can sort of take forward and apply in 2024 as the broader national election takes shape?
Sure. I mean, I do think, again, given that all these races are in suburban areas, there is obviously a higher concentration of college-educated voters in these districts. And those always are, where our national elections are competitive at, whether it's in Pennsylvania, around the suburbs of Pittsburgh and in Philadelphia, or in Wisconsin, around Madison and Milwaukee. Those suburban voters are certainly going to be key for this year, but also 24, regardless of whether it's a presidential race or U.S. Senate or congressional. So I think, looking at how our candidates perform there, and again, these are districts that, while the governor carried some of them, he didn't carry all these districts. I mean, if you look at the Senate side, our 7 targeted Senate races, Republican congressional candidates didn't win any of them in 2022. And so if we're able to obviously win a number of these races, maintain a majority in the House and flip the Senate, I think it is a good roadmap for how candidates can communicate with suburban voters in particular, about tone, about message, about voter contact, and then how you encourage them to actually go out and cast a ballot.
Yeah. Is history any guide for how odd year Virginia elections can apply to even year presidential races? I mean, I point out that Governor Youngkin won in swing Virginia just a year before Democrats had a really good year in the midterms.
Yeah, look, I think it all comes down to a couple of things. It comes down to candidate quality, which is one of the reasons why the governor and his team, we got engaged in primaries. We went 10 for 10 in our target races here because we knew we had to have the right candidate with the right background and message to be competitive. And if we didn't get the right nominee, it may cost us that seat. And so candidate quality matters, as do campaigns. It shouldn't be a surprise that if you don't have a good candidate who isn't on a message and isn't able to raise resources and doesn't run a good campaign, it shouldn't be a surprise that they're not successful. And so one of the things that we focus on is obviously having a good candidate, but then second, ensuring that they're running and executing good campaign plans, which is why, we provided through our PAC all the data operations for all the candidates, all the modeling, all the targeting we did and provided to the campaigns so that they could most effectively communicate their candidate's message. And so I think that's the other big lesson to learn, I think, from this year is making sure that we've got the best candidates possible and that they are prepared to run and execute, strong campaigns.
Yeah. The Spirit of Virginia PAC, Governor Youngkin's group that you run, put out an advertisement embracing the 15-week abortion ban in what looked like an effort to sort of unify Republicans around a single abortion message. Tell us a little bit about that. I mean, what was the goal of running that ad at a time when a lot of Republicans on the campaign trail just don't want to talk about abortion?
Sure. Look, it's just like every other campaign in America. When you are attacked on an issue, you have to respond. If you don't respond to that attack, it kind of sets in. And so our perspective on it was, whether it had been, a hit on taxes or crime or whatever it was going to be, we were going to respond and very clearly articulate, where our position is on this issue, which is 15 weeks. With protections for the life of the mother and rape and incest, and also highlight, that the Democrats in Virginia are far out of step with where a majority of Virginians are, that they want no limits on abortion all the way up to 40 weeks. And that's a position that had not really been articulated in the past. It certainly wasn't articulated in a lot of races in 2022. And we saw how that went. And so we felt it was important to clearly to state where we stand on the issue, but also, be very clear with the fact that the Democrats have no limits, and that's not a position that a majority of Virginians share.
You mentioned a little bit about how involved the governor's team has been. Of course, these races have attracted amazing amounts of money from all across the country and from outside Democratic groups and Republican groups. How much, though, do you want voters to see these races as a referendum on Governor Youngkin's first couple of years in office? I mean, he's not on the ballot, but do you want him on voters' minds as they're walking in to cast their ballot?
Sure. Look, what we've told and what we've focused on all along, of these are local races. These are candidates that are deeply rooted within their communities, that understand their communities, and that they're going to go to Richmond and represent their communities there. Now, behind that, overwhelmingly in all these districts, the governor's image is extremely strong. They approve of his job performance. They like him personally. They think the state's heading in the right direction, and they want a legislator who will work with the governor to accomplish his priorities. And so I think the governor is certainly providing a lot of lift behind the candidates because of the environment of where he is in Virginia, particularly when you look at where President Biden is, where he's upside down in every one of these districts. And these are districts that he won in 2020. He's upside down on job approval, on image. And so having a popular governor that people like and want and support his agenda is certainly giving our candidates some lift. But at the end of the day, the voters, to your point, are going there to vote for Tara Durant for Senate, or Bill Wolf for Senate, or Ian Lovejoy for House. And so at the end of the day, it's those are local issues, local candidates that are ultimately going to be on the ballot, and that's the most important thing for our voters and candidates to consider.
Yeah. You also referenced how voters choose to vote. And now I know the Youngkin team has been encouraging Republican voters to vote early, either in person or by absentee, which is a pretty big break from former President Trump's message. Why does banking votes early matter? And can you give us a hint of how successful you've been?
Sure. I mean, I think if you look historically, our party has not embraced the whole time frame of when ballots are being cast. And so obviously the governor, and the analogy that we often use, obviously the governor loves basketball. We've talked about a lot. What we've often said is, we have to play the game from the moment the ball is tipped off into the buzzer at the end of the game. And that if we're sitting on the sidelines, sitting on the bench, complaining about the calls while the Democrats are running up and down the court making easy baskets, we shouldn't be surprised when we come and find ourselves down a couple points at the end of the game. And so we've got to get the game. We have to play. We know what the rules are. We have to play by the rules from the very beginning to the buzzer sound. And so that's what we've done this year. We have focused on communicating with all voters, Republicans, independents, and others, to say, here are your three options. You can vote by mail, you can vote early, or you can vote on election day. This is how you do it. This is why it's important. We've certainly embraced it. I think it will be a great roadmap for candidates across the country next year to look at and see what was successful, what can be improved upon. We'll be prepared to do that next year for 2024. As how it looks now, look, we're right on pace with where we thought we would be. I think we've certainly seen more engagement and more participation than we have in recent years, particularly in off-year elections when, as you mentioned, there is nothing at the top of the ballot. And so I think we're on pace with where we want to be, but we still have, quite a few days to go. Our first two really big early vote days are coming up this weekend and next weekend when Every locality has a Saturday hours and Saturday locations open. Up to this point, been primarily just Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. And so, we'll certainly see a larger engagement in early vote this Saturday and next Saturday as well.
Yeah. It struck me, and this is the last one I'll ask you, in recent years, we're in something of a golden age of voter participation, right? I mean, even in these off-year Virginia elections, Terry McAuliffe got 500,000 more votes in 2021 than he did in 2020 or 2013, the year he won. And yet you all pulled even more votes to beat him that year. As we look at this high voter participation rates, even in the early vote, in what the polls are saying voters are likely to turn out to vote, how does that change the way you prepare for and run a campaign?
When we looked at these races and we did our analysis, the conclusion that we came to was that the more people that participated, the better off our candidates were going to be. And so we have kind of taken the position that we want as high a turnout as possible. I know that kind of doesn't necessarily go against some of the framing that can be out there sometimes, but our view is the more people that vote, the more people that participate, the better off our candidates are. Because if you look historically, in 2019 and in other off years, it's Republicans that kind of stayed home. And so obviously in 21, the governor was able to have a dramatic increase in Republican participation, but we also got a lot of independents. As the governor says, off the sidelines and into the game. We're certainly seeing that again this year. And so from our perspective, the more people vote, the more people that have their voice heard is better for our chances to hold the House and flip the Senate.
Does that mean a sort of a larger share of your messaging is about mobilization rather than persuasion? Or how do you think about that balance?
No, we've kind of taken an all of the above approach. We've certainly spent a fair amount of time talking to persuadable voters and even marginal Democrats that like the governor and approve of what the governor's doing. And there's a large group of marginal Democrats in all these districts that our candidates have been talking to really since July. And also at the same time, we're talking to our base to turn out. And so it's been a multi-track effort, and every district is different. How you get to your win number in each district is slightly adjusted. And so we've been very focused on talking to everybody that we felt could be persuaded to, one, vote for our candidates, and two, to turn out. Particularly looking at those, who may have skipped this previous election cycle. And if you look at 21 and 22, there were a large number of voters who came out and voted for the governor in 21, but stayed home in 22. Because to your point, there wasn't anything at the top of the ticket. And so that's a group that we've also, spent a fair amount of time communicating with over the past couple of months.
Gotcha. All right, David Rexrode, the chairman of the Spirit of Virginia PAC and a senior advisor to Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin. Hey, thanks so much for being with us today, Dave.
Absolutely, anytime.
All right, we're really grateful for Dave for taking the time, even though he's a little busy these days. Finally today, I want to bring in my colleague Kyle Trigstad, managing editor of Pluribus News, to talk through a few other things on the ballot, things that I love more than anything else, ballot initiatives. Kyle, Ohio is like ground zero this year. Voters are going to decide on whether to codify reproductive rights in the state constitution. And this is, we've talked about since the decision in Dobbs. We've talked about abortion in Kansas and Kentucky and California and Vermont and Michigan. This is the biggest test of abortion rights on the ballot this year, isn't it?
Yeah, as the governor mentioned, we saw abortion rights supporters receive big wins last year in Kansas and Kentucky, which are more Republican than Ohio. But then also we've had recent polling in Ohio and a related vote there in August. Everything's pointing to another big win for abortion rights supporters. It looks like $45 million went into that last vote in August. That was to raise the threshold for amending the Constitution. It would go from a simple majority to 60%. And that effort was obviously designed to make it harder for the November abortion amendment to be approved. And 57% of voters rejected it. So, and then in a poll out last week, 58% said they're going to support this initiative in a couple weeks. So it's looking good for abortion rights supporters again. I don't think they've lost since that big decision.
No, they haven't. And it was clear that August election was about the abortion rights measure coming up this year. So I think we're going to see Democrats putting a lot of these measures on the ballot in 2024. You can imagine battleground states like Arizona, Nevada, places like that. Well, Nevada has sort of a two-step process. I think they missed the window there, but at least Arizona, you're going to see efforts like that. So the Democrats are trying to keep abortion front and center there. Last, on a more sort of broad-based support ballot initiative, there's an initiative on the ballot in Ohio to legalize marijuana for recreational purposes. And I say broad-based support because I feel like the normal coalitions for left and right don't apply to legal pot stuff. Like, you're more likely to see, young suburban mothers voting against it and older white conservative men voting in favor of legalization. But they tried to legalize marijuana in Ohio in 2015, and it went down in absolute flames. I think in no small part because the voters didn't like it when the pro-pot side rolled out a mascot named Buddy that was exactly what you think it was, right? Just go Google it, Buddy the mascot, and you'll see it's it's pot plant, right? Not exactly the message that they're conveying this year, is it?
No, they've changed tactics clearly. And I don't know what the Venn diagram is with the abortion initiative, but in that same poll I just mentioned, just about the same percentage, 57% said they're going to support legalization of marijuana. And that included majorities of voters from both parties. It was much larger for Democrats, but still, and it's a pretty clear sign which way the smoke is blowing, if you will.
The smoke is, how long did you work on that? Nice job. There are a couple other big initiatives out there in Maine, in Texas, and places like that. Go check out pluribusnews.com, search the word initiatives. Actually, maybe we should put the ballot measure story back up on the front so everybody can read it. We did a whole preview rundown of all the hot ballot initiatives that are up this year. But Kyle, thanks so much for giving us the rundown on Ohio.
Anytime.
All right, now I want to turn to our sponsors, the American Property Owners Association. I sat down with the group's executive director, Colin Allen, to talk about what every governor and legislator in America is talking about today, the housing crisis. So let's take a listen to my conversation with Colin Allen. I'm joined now by Colin Allen, the executive director of the American Property Owners Alliance. Colin, first of all, thanks for sponsoring today's event. Tell us about the American Property Owners Alliance. What do you advocate for?
Well, Reed, thanks for having us. Glad to be here and glad we could be a sponsor of the event today. The American Property Owners Alliance, to start off, is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. We're really created to support and protect property owners. We try to keep folks current, and the current owners and aspiring property owners. We want to keep people informed on the policies, the regulations, the things, and help them keep their elected officials accountable and to prioritize pro-housing policies. Really, in addition to the grassroots work that we do, I just got back from Montgomery, Alabama last night. We do events around the country, trying to talk about financial empowerment and generational wealth building opportunities through home ownership. So we've done a few of those this year in Charlotte, Dallas, Cleveland, Montgomery, like I mentioned. And right now, we're really focused on improving availability and affordability in the market. And making sure that property owners can maintain their homes, right? Because it's not just about getting those keys and getting in the door. We want to make sure that people can stay in their homes and benefit from that generational wealth that they're able to accumulate.
Yeah. One thing that always strikes me is how widespread the housing crisis is in America. I mean, it impacts urban cores and rural areas alike. Give us your sense of the scope. What does the housing situation look like to the American Property Owners Alliance?
Yeah, look, I mean, what we're seeing here is a consequence of literally decades of imbalance in housing supply and demand. We've got years and years of underinvestment, underbuilding. We've got a housing shortage because of that. It's approximately 5 million homes. What we've got right now is, I think there's about 1.13 million homes that are available for sale right now, as compared to, there were 4 million homes for sale at this time in 2007. And home prices have risen by approximately 30% over the last few years. So we've got that combined with, close to 8% mortgage rates right now, really, really causing some issues on affordability. The folks who have been able to benefit from the low rates that we enjoyed for, the last decade and a half are hesitant to move right now. So really, as I mentioned, property ownership is this critical tool for building generational wealth. and we want to protect those benefits. So, what we're trying to do is provide support for first-time home buyers and make sure that people that they currently own can benefit from the tax advantages of owning a property.
Mhm.
So we need to prioritize these kinds of solutions as we're looking forward and moving forward.
Yeah. Previous generations were able to get into their first homes in their 20s. Now it's people in their 30s and even their 40s just beginning to afford their first homes. What needs to change to broaden access to housing for so many people?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, right? As you know, I think we're at the point where this is the highest average age of a first-time buyer we've ever seen. If you look at the statistics from the National Association of Realtors, the average age of first-time buyer was 36 last year, and only a quarter of the market was made up of first-time buyers. Add to that you've got this, historic and continually high gap between black and white homeowners, and we've got some equity issues there as well. And despite that, I think 80% of folks still want to buy a home. So there's a strong desire to get in and realize that American dream. Really, it's the key to this is restoring this access to housing supply. Right, we need to build more, build now. And I think of a few of the things, at least from the federal government side, right? The federal government can really just get out of the way and provide resources to the states and localities as they're moving forward. So we developed some grant programs to develop affordable homes across the country, both rental and ownership. Right, we got this property ownership ladder that you need an affordable place to rent before you can save up. And really equipping states and local governments to fund these programs is going to be helpful.
So you've touched on this a few times, and I think this is an interesting angle here. When we talk about housing, we largely talk about people getting into their first homes, but you've referenced a few times existing home buyers and how to maximize their value and their wealth, and how are rising home values impacting those people who already have homes?
So, right, it's an interesting, thing that kind of cuts both ways, right? You'd think everybody would be excited about the value of their home going up, but with the value of that home going up, you're also seeing increasing tax bills. So especially for folks who may be on a fixed income, right? This is not something they had necessarily baked into their calculus when they bought. So they're seeing these rising tax bills and having to deal with the payments that they're having to make. Maybe their mortgage is gone, but you're having to figure in these increased tax bills. Get that double whammy from the federal side where you've now got a limit on the amount of state and local taxes you can deduct. It's kind of tough for some folks to do this. So I think as we're planning forward, right, looking at potentially expanding that state and local tax deduction at the federal level to double it for married couples. It expires in 2025. So I think, again, taking a look at that. And as the state legislatures are considering this next year, I know a lot of them are looking at, what can we do to support our property owners as they're facing these mounting tax bills. So I think, look to see that in some of the state legislatures next year as well.
Yeah, and we've seen at least 4 states are trying to qualify ballot initiatives this year to rein in property tax increases. That feels like a real trend that we're going to see coming up in next year's legislative cycles, sessions. Is anything happening at the federal level to support the state housing market? So what does Congress need to do to get its act in gear?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think you're seeing a lot of attention at it from the federal level. The Biden-Harris administration announced a housing action plan last week, I believe, that was taking some action on that front. So it's good to see the administration paying attention. We've got a few proposals in front of Congress. The Neighborhood Homes Investment Act would allow some tax incentives for development of underutilized and abandoned properties. So I think taking a look at that would bring close to 500,000 new homes to the market, and really in that niche that's kind of the affordable area, right? Which is, I think, looking at where the desire really is, that first-time buyer, not necessarily that move up, but the people who really want to get in and need something in that the entry level. Is really what we're looking at. And then taking a look at grants and tax incentives for first-time home buyers. I think there's a lot of attention on the federal side, and especially as we move in the Congress into 2025 with the expiration of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 and some of the individual side provisions there's going to be a lot more attention there. So again, I think anything that we can do there to increase supply is a good thing, and having the federal government be able to step back and support state and local initiatives is really the best place for them.
Yeah, I know from talking to so many governors and legislators across the country, this is absolutely top of mind for everybody from, downtown Berkeley to rural West Virginia and everywhere in between. So you got a lot of people paying attention to what you're talking about. So Colin Allen, Executive Director of the American Property Owners Alliance, thanks again for sponsoring today's event, and thanks so much for being with me.
Thanks, Reed. Appreciate your time. Glad to join you.
All right. That does it for us today. My thanks to Governor Phil Murphy, David Rexrode, Kyle Trigstad, and Colin Allen, and the American Property Owners Association. And thanks to all of you for joining. We'll do a big subscribers-only event on Wednesday, November 8th, to break down what happened on Election Day, looking back at all these races we just talked about. So we hope you can join us for that. It'll be jam-packed with data and analysis from across the country, so keep your eyes on your inboxes. Until then, I'm Reed Wilson. Thanks for being a part of the Pluribus News community, and we'll see you next time.